And I now declare open this hearing of the Senate Education and Employment Legislation Committee into the COVID-19 Vaccination Status Prevention of Discrimination Bill 2022 and the Fair Work Amendment Prohibiting COVID-19 Vaccine Discrimination Bill 2023. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. And I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. The committee will be conducting today's hearing via video conference and in person. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. I remind committee members and witnesses who are appearing via video conference who are not speaking to please mute their microphones. Now I welcome representatives from Pfizer Australia via video conference. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear here today?
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Krishan Thiru, Medical Director, Pfizer Australia.
And Dr. Brian Hewitt, Head of Regulatory Sciences, Pfizer Australia.
Thank you, Dr. Thiru and Dr. Hewitt. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and the conclusion of any remarks I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Pfizer thanks the Senate Standing Committee on Education and Employment for the opportunity to appear at the hearing today. As has been communicated to the committee previously, Pfizer believes the debate on the prevention of discrimination based on COVID-19 vaccination status, which is at the core of both the bills that are subject to inquiry by this committee, is a policy matter for government. However, with our recent experience developing, manufacturing and supplying a COVID-19 vaccine, Pfizer is happy to share details of this experience. With approximately 80,000 employees globally and one of the most sophisticated supply chain systems in the industry, Pfizer is one of the largest biopharmaceutical companies in the world. Pfizer is proud to have had operations in Australia since 1956. We have more than 1,000 employees in Australia and operate across 2 commercial sites in Sydney and Melbourne, and a manufacturing facility in Melbourne that exports to over 60 countries worldwide. Pfizer is a proven, reliable, multinational vaccine producer, supplying vaccines that prevent a multitude of diseases and infections to 175 countries, even prior to the pandemic, when we manufactured more than 200 million doses of Pfizer vaccines annually. Additionally, Pfizer is one of the largest sterile injectable suppliers in the world, producing more than 1 billion sterile units per year. Last year, more than 1 out of every 6 people worldwide are estimated to have used a Pfizer medicine or vaccine. As of June 4, 2023, we have delivered more than 4.6 billion COVID-19 vaccine doses to 181 countries and territories in every region of the world. These numbers represent real people around the world who are helped by what Pfizer scientists developed and brought to patients. At the start of 2020, as the SARS-CoV-2 virus began rapidly spreading across the globe, Pfizer and our partner BioNTech recognised the urgency and need to play a leadership role in addressing the global public health crisis. On March 17, 2020, just 6 days after the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a pandemic, Pfizer signed a letter of intent with BioNTech to co-develop a potential COVID-19 vaccine. We worked to safely accelerate the development, manufacture and distribution of an mRNA-based coronavirus vaccine for active immunisation to prevent COVID-19 infection. In less than a year, it received emergency use approval from the US Food and Drug Administration, the first COVID-19 vaccine to be granted such authorisation. In addition to the public health benefit, vaccine access has also had a tremendous economic benefit in Australia. A peer-reviewed paper in the scientific journal Vaccines estimated the timely rollout of COVID-19 vaccinations to have reduced the impact of the pandemic on the Australian economy, resulting in a positive incremental benefit of $181 billion, contributing to significant positive effects for tourism exports, education exports, employment and government finances. Pfizer has confidence in the safety of our vaccine, given the urgent public health need to develop a vaccine in a safe and responsible way. We collaborated closely with independent regulatory and health authorities around the world to conduct key activities in parallel to allow us to significantly accelerate vaccine development without compromising safety. The Independent Data Monitoring Committee for our landmark trial did not report any serious safety concerns related to the vaccine prior to licensing. The data demonstrates the vaccine is well tolerated across the authorised indications and across all age groups, and the most common side effects reported have been local reactions at the injection site. Since its FDA authorisation in 2020, Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine has been administered to hundreds of millions of individuals globally and continues to be vigilantly monitored through trials and post-authorisation surveillance. The vaccine has received full regulatory approval in a variety of countries, including the United States, the EU and Australia, following earlier emergency use, conditional or provisional approvals. These authorisations are based on robust and independent evaluation of the scientific data on quality, safety and efficacy, including our landmark phase 3 trial. Data from real-world studies complement the clinical trial data and provide additional evidence that the vaccine provides effective protection against severe disease. We take all adverse events that are potentially associated with our COVID-19 vaccine very seriously. We closely monitor all such events and collect relevant information to share with global regulatory authorities. Based on ongoing safety reviews performed by Pfizer, BioNTech and health authorities, the vaccine retains a positive benefit-risk profile for the prevention of COVID-19 infections. To date, hundreds of millions of people have been vaccinated with our vaccine. Pfizer and BioNTech have invested more than $2 billion US at risk to develop our COVID-19 vaccine. Within just 13 months from December 2020...
Chair, could I just... Sorry to interrupt. So we just have very limited time. Just a point of order. I wonder if we could just have an indication of how long to go, and we could, of course, table any opening statement. That opportunity is there. But sorry to interrupt. I'm mindful of the clock.
It would be of assistance, and it saves us having to have another hearing.
There is about 1 minute to go, but I'm happy to be guided by you, Chair.
If you can wrap up quickly, that would be great. And then, and if you could make if you could just email somebody from your office, email their opening statement, we might have it in front of us there as well.
Would be happy to do that. Let me close. Vaccine manufacturing is a biological production that is extraordinarily complex under any circumstances. Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine requires 280 components and relies upon 86 suppliers located in 19 different countries. As a result, the maintenance of strong and reliable global supply chains is crucial to the ongoing production and availability of the vaccine. Fundamental to Pfizer's ability to commit the R&D investment into vaccines and treatments are pro-innovation policy settings, including a strong intellectual property system. Large-scale pandemics like COVID-19 are likely to occur again. Epidemiologists forecast that the frequency and scale of future pandemics may steadily increase, and as such, near-term pandemic readiness efforts are critical to respond to future pandemic and/or public health emergencies at the domestic and global levels. Pfizer is proud of its collaboration we've had with the Australian government, and we will look forward to continuing that partnership to ensure Australia is even better prepared for future threats to public health. Pfizer hopes that its appearance at this public hearing assists the Senate committee.
Thank you. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for appearing today and your evidence. Did Pfizer test whether your COVID-19 vaccine could stop or reduce the transmission of the virus before its approval and rollout in late 2020?
Senator, to bring this vaccine to patients, we were required to show that the vaccine was safe and effective in preventing illness, in preventing severe disease, and in preventing hospitalisations. The primary purpose of vaccination was and remains to protect the person who received the vaccine.
I'll just repeat the question. I appreciate that, but there hasn't been an answer to it. And perhaps I might just add into the record that on the 3rd of December 2020, your CEO, Mr Albert Bourla, told NBC News, and I quote, when he was asked whether vaccinated people could carry and spread the virus, he responded to NBC News that, and I quote, "I think this is something that needs to be examined. We are not certain about that right now." So was Mr Bourla correct that as of December the 3rd, 2020, Pfizer did not know whether the vaccine could stop or reduce the spread of the virus?
Senator, as with all vaccines seeking regulatory authorisation, the requirement is to demonstrate in robust clinical programs that the vaccine is safe and effective in preventing the infection, and in this case, in preventing severe disease and hospitalisation.
I might just give you one more. Sorry to interrupt, but I've got very limited time. I've got 5 minutes. So is it yes or no? Did you test whether transmission would be reduced or stopped before the approval of the vaccine?
Senator, we designed our clinical programs in agreement with regulatory agencies, the purpose of which was to demonstrate the vaccine was safe and effective in preventing infections.
Okay. All right. We might just move on then to another, well, not another topic, but on the 14th of January 2021, so just a month, 6 weeks after Mr Bourla's statement to NBC News, 6 weeks later, the official Pfizer Twitter account tweeted that, and I quote, "The ability to vaccinate at speed to gain herd immunity and stop transmission is our highest priority." On what evidential basis, what evidence did Pfizer have to make that public statement to imply that vaccination could stop transmission?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the context or the details of those comments, but let me just say that the primary purpose of vaccination, the approved product label, the regulatory approvals in Australia and around the world were to prevent infection, prevent severe disease, and prevent hospitalisation. That is what our clinical trial program sought to demonstrate. That was what was demonstrated, and that was the evidence that was evaluated by regulatory agencies, by health authorities, and that was the evidence, the strong, robust clinical evidence that led to the approvals that were received in Australia and in many other countries.
Could I ask you to take that on notice then? The question being on what evidence did Pfizer have for their statement on Twitter on the January the 14th, 2021?
Senator, I'd be happy to take that question on notice and come back to the committee with what information we're able to provide.
So by June in 2021, on the 8th of June, the Pfizer CEO, Mr Albert Bourla, he tweeted, and I quote, that the vaccine was a critical tool to help stop transmission. Was there any evidence, what evidence did Mr Bourla have by that stage, by June the 8th, 2021, that vaccination could stop transmission?
Senator, it has been very clearly demonstrated that the robust efficacy of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine has been a centrally important tool in enabling societies to open up international borders, to reduce...
Okay, I'm asking for what evidence. What is that evidence? Can you point me to a study that Pfizer or an independent scientist has done that to give grounds for Mr Bourla's statement that your vaccine stopped transmission?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the context of that statement.
Okay,
we've complied and worked very closely with the regulatory agencies around the world to prove the evidence that they required to approve this vaccine to prevent infection, severe disease and hospitalisations.
Okay, could I ask you to take on notice again the evidential basis for Mr Bourla's comments in what was the date? June the 8th, 2021.
I'd be happy to take that.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you still believe that the COVID vaccine, your COVID vaccine, is a critical tool to help stop transmission?
Absolutely. It's a critical tool in preventing, as I said earlier, infections, severe disease and hospitalisation.
Okay, that wasn't my question. You did, I think, say absolutely, but just to be clear on that evidence, and if I could get you to clarify it, do you believe, is Pfizer's view, that your COVID vaccine is a critical tool to help stop transmission?
Sorry, I may have misheard your question.
Okay.
Sir. I was reporting.
Yes, okay, that's why I re-asked it. I thought you might have misinterpreted it. But is your view that your vaccine is a critical tool to help stop transmission?
Pfizer's view is that the vaccine is a critical tool in protecting the health of individuals who are vaccinated and enabling society to operate normally as it is at the moment.
Well, okay, I'm taking from that you don't think that it's a critical tool to help stop transmission. You haven't repeated Mr Burler's statement today under oath, so it doesn't sound like you're that confident in it. What I'm concerned about here is that you have a statement from your CEO that is obviously has huge weight for governments around the world on their regulatory settings, saying that the COVID vaccine could stop transmission or was a critical tool to help stop transmission. Can you point me to any statements made by Pfizer officials, the Pfizer CEO, anything that has pulled back, that has somewhat moved away from that very strong statement of Mr Burler's in June 2021 that it was a critical tool to help transmission? Have you clarified the record since that time?
Senator, I'm very confident that the evidence that we have presented to regulatory agencies still stands and clearly demonstrates that the vaccine is safe and effective for its intended use.
That's not my question. That's not. I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry to pull you up. I don't normally do this, but we have very limited time, and you are being very, very shifty here. You are not answering the very clear questions.
Senator Kennedy,
So,
can I just
oh, hang on. Sorry, Senator.
no, it's not.
Can I just? Sorry, can I?
I'd like
Sorry,
to
no. Can I
Dr.
just?
Hewitt answer
Can I?
the question
Can I?
because he's the scientist.
Can I just? Senator Canavan's got the floor. Any questions are through the chair. And secondly, I do allocate time so people can actually have their train of questions,
I'll finish up now.
which I'll allocate to others.
I'll
go
finish.
to Senator Rennick next.
I'll finish with this, but what my point here is that governments by late 2021 in this country, our government, Australian government, state governments imposed vaccine mandates on their own employees and required other employers to impose them on their employees. They definitely did that in part based on the evidence and advice from organisations like yourself, from the statements of Mr Burler. We were constantly told by our leaders that your vaccine was necessary to stop the spread. And I have pages and pages of quotes from those leaders saying that the vaccine would stop the spread. What I'm asking you is, you would have seen those statements. You're the head of regulatory services. You would have seen those statements. Is there any statement from Pfizer that clarified Mr Burler's statement from June 2021 that responded to the very strong statements from premiers about your product? Because if there's not, what you're doing is effectively only reporting the good news that you have about your vaccine and not clarifying where there may be a shortcoming from your product that has then led to thousands of Australians to lose their jobs. Why? Yes, and their livelihoods. Why hasn't Pfizer clarified the record on transmission when governments have used that to mandate your product and provide you then with billions of dollars of profits around the world by doing so?
Senator, perhaps I can make a comment. So Pfizer was very clear in making an application to TGA that it sought an indication for active immunisation to prevent coronavirus disease caused by SARS-CoV-2.
But you said more than that. That's not what I'm asking about. Your public statements from your CEO. He said it was a critical tool to stop transmission. And I can't find anything from him or anyone else of his employees that has removed back from that statement since, yet you won't repeat his statement on evidence today. So you obviously don't believe in it. Why haven't you clarified the public record since June of 2021?
Just before you answer that question, I'll need, if you can answer that question, but then I'll go to Senator Rennick.
So, Senator, again, I can only repeat that in making an application to TGA, Pfizer sought active immunisation to prevent coronavirus disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 and was very clear in its application to TGA.
Senator Rennick.
Yeah, hi guys, how are you going? I note that you've already stated today that the vaccine was designed to actually stop or prevent infection. And this was also reiterated by your CEO, Albert Bourla, on the 2nd of April 2021. where he posted a tweet, and I'll quote, "Excited to share that updated analysis from our phase 3 study showed that our COVID-19 vaccine was 100% effective in preventing COVID-19 cases." Now, by September 2022, Australia had recorded 10 million cases of COVID, despite having an adult population vaccinated to the tune of 95%. Given those real-world figures in Australia, do you still stand by that statement you've just said today to Senator Canavan, that the vaccine was effective in preventing infection?
Senator, we strongly believe and we reiterate that the vaccine is safe and effective for its intended use. What changed was that the virus evolved. If we look at the clinical data from before the virus mutated into Delta, Omicron and subsequent variants, the vaccine maintained high levels of efficacy. If we look at the 6-month data from the pivotal trial, efficacy for prevention of serious...
Sorry, I'm not referring to trials. I'm referring to the Omicron variant, and that's a product of the nature of the vaccine, where you have actually designed a vaccine that's an epitope on one spike protein and not the other 28 proteins in the vaccine. So that's a design fault of yours, the fact that it can't cope with other variants, because that's the nature of the way you've designed that vaccine.
Senator, I categorically reject your statement. The vaccine was carefully designed against the virus that was prevalent at the time, which was the original wild-type virus, and it remained highly effective against preventing illness and preventing severe disease.
Can you define highly effective in terms of a duration?
Senator, when the wild-type virus was prevalent, efficacy of approximately or greater than 90% was maintained at 6 months for both overall illnesses and severe disease.
Because the TGA non-clinical report on the Pfizer vaccine said that T cells, antibodies and T cells in monkeys declined quickly after 5 weeks after the second dose of the vaccine. So the best we've got here in animal studies was 5 weeks. 35 days, a little bit over a month. So why are you saying 6 months when animal studies showed 5 weeks, and in human studies you cut them short after 2 months?
Senator, the human immune system doesn't rely on antibodies alone. Antibodies provide short-term protection against infection. T cell and other immune responses, which are a little bit more difficult to measure, provide longer lasting protection.
Well, maybe you didn't hear what I just said. It said, however, antibodies and T cells decline quickly after 5 weeks. That's what the TGA Pfizer non-clinical report said, 5 weeks.
Senator, it is very difficult to measure the totality of the immune system's responses against the infection. What we need to rely on...
Well, OK then, so if that's the case, sorry.
Just, Senator Regan, if Dr Through can just finish his answer. Are you finished, Dr Through? Yeah. I mean, by all means, if you've got something else to say it, but then I'll go back to Senator Rennick.
Yeah, just one more comment. What we then need to look to is clinical outcomes, and it's very clear that even with the Omicron variant, with a virus that's now quite different to the original virus, that efficacy against, in particular, severe disease, hospitalisation, and people not surviving is maintained for significant durations.
OK, I'm referring to infection, because for the bulk of the people, half the country was infected with COVID 10 months after. And for healthy working age population, their risk from COVID was very low. So I'm putting in the context here that these people were forced to take a vaccine that you said, and you've said today, was effective in preventing infection. And that's not the real world data. The real world data showed that almost 50% of the population, despite being vaccinated twice, if not 3 times, caught COVID. And you've just said it's very difficult to measure the duration. So are you going to retract the statement that the vaccine was effective? Because you've basically contradicted yourself already.
Senator, the virus had approval for the prevention of infection, for the prevention of severe disease and the prevention of hospitalisation. Despite the fact that the virus had evolved, had mutated significantly, vaccination remained significantly effective against severe disease and hospitalisation for prolonged periods.
Okay, I'll move on to safety. Thank you.
May I say something? I actually reject your statement that people were forced to take the vaccine.
Well, that's not, okay, we'll deal with that later. That's not your decision, so that's not to do with today. Okay, given that according to the Pfizer non-clinical report, there was no carcinogenic tests, no genotoxicity tests, no immunotoxicity tests, no interaction studies with other medicines, no longitudinal studies, and I note that in regards to pregnancy and lactation, that studies were conducted on rats. How can Pfizer say that the vaccine was unequivocally safe without qualifying any risks around the vaccine?
Senator, I don't have that report in front of me, so I'm afraid I can't talk to that. What I can say is that the TGA is one of the world's leading regulators.
Okay. Well, you can take my word for it. I'm happy to table this document. Okay. So it clearly stated that a number of tests were not conducted. Okay, and given that those tests weren't conducted, and I accept it was a short time frame, I accept we had a short time frame, but that doesn't remove the risk that certain risks were not analysed, and you never highlighted those risks when the vaccine was rolled out.
Senator, I disagree with that statement. I think there was a very clear assessment of the benefit risk. The Therapeutic Goods Administration is a very thorough and very competent authority, perfectly able to reach a decision based on data of which it reviews.
Okay. So initially when the vaccine was rolled out, myocarditis and pericarditis wasn't a recognised side effect. Does Pfizer understand why the vaccine causes myocarditis and pericarditis? And if not, how then can it guarantee that it's not also injuring other organs? And can you explain the process why the vaccine causes myocarditis and pericarditis?
I'll take that, Dr. Hewitt.
Sure.
Based on our clinical trials and pharmacovigilance data, as well as real-world evidence following the distribution now of billions of doses of vaccine, we retain confidence, strong confidence in the safety profile of the vaccine.
Sorry, Chair, point of order. I've asked, do you understand why it causes, I know that it's a low risk, I'm asking, do you understand why it causes myocarditis? I want you to explain to me why it causes myocarditis. Do you understand why it causes myocarditis?
Pfizer is aware of very rare reports of myocarditis and pericarditis that have been temporarily associated with vaccination.
Well, they're still ongoing for some people.
Senator Reddick, Dr. Through should answer the question. Thank you, Dr. Through.
According to public health experts and regulatory authorities around the globe, the number of reports of myocarditis remains small.
I'm not referring to the number of reports. I want you to explain to me the mechanism of how the vaccine causes myocarditis. Do you or do you not understand the mechanism of why the vaccine causes myocarditis? It looks to me like you don't. And if you don't understand it, why are you saying the vaccine is safe without qualifying the risks?
So, Senator Reddick, I think Dr. Thoreau is actually about to get to that point. Whether people agree, whether there's agreement to his evidence or not, is another question for others to make a judgment on. But if Dr. Thoreau, if you could again go to Senator Reddick's question.
Senator, all medicines, all therapeutic products and vaccines have benefits and have side effects as well. Looking at the totality of the evidence for Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, regulatory authorities, health authorities, experts globally, including in Australia within the Department of Health and the TGA, have maintained that the benefit-risk ratio...
That's not the question that I asked. I asked, can you explain why the vaccine causes myocarditis? Yes or no?
Senator, the benefit-risk profile...
Yes or no? So you clearly don't understand the pathway, do you? Because you can't explain it. I'm not referring to the cost-benefit analysis here. I'm referring to, do you understand the biochemical pathway as to why the vaccine causes damage to the heart?
Senator, I'm happy to take your question on notice and come back to the committee with whatever information we can provide. I might just clarify, I was not referring to a cost-benefit analysis in my previous response. I was referring to the benefit risk ratio, and health authorities around the globe continue to recommend the benefits.
And this isn't the question that I'm asking. Anyway, thanks, Chair.
But can I just so I'm clarify as well, Dr. Through, you've agreed to take the question on notice and give further response to that question. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair. As I understand, the question was about the mechanisms, and we're happy to take that question on notice.
Senator Antic.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I want to refer you to a recent study published in Elsevier journal, peer-reviewed study, I believe, from late last year. I've got copies here, which I can tender those if we like. The cut and thrust of it was, though, that the study shows that the risks of these vaccines is greater than previously reported, and it shows that, using your own publicly available data, that there was one serious adverse event for every 800 vaccinations, which translates to about 1,250 serious events for every million vaccine recipients. Now, when you look at that in comparison to the rate for conventional vaccines, it's about I think one every 1 or 2 million, and in fact the 1976 swine flu vaccine was withdrawn after it was associated with Guillain-Barré syndrome at a rate of about 1 in 100,000. But this is particularly difficult when you factor into account that those who are at the lowest risk for hospitalisation were probably at the highest risk for serious vaccine reactions. Was Pfizer aware of these matters before it was approved in Australia, and did you alert the regulator, the TGA, to these risks?
Senator, I'm sorry, I'm not aware of the report that you're reading, or indeed the article from which you are quoting. Could you just repeat your question again? It was very complex, and I'm not sure I fully understood it.
Well, the question was, were you aware of the 1 in 800 rate of return on serious adverse events, and the fact that the profile of those events damaged or affected those who are the least likely to be hospitalised most prior to the drug being submitted for approval? And did you make the TGA aware of those risks?
So, Senator, again, I can't speak to that. I don't have that report in front of me. I think one thing I would note overall, that global regulators are continually assessing the vaccine safety data in their regions. And the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Authorities, which is a coalition of 38 medicines regulatory authorities from every region in the world, recently released a statement, and that statement was endorsed by the European Medicines Agency, confirming the safety profile of COVID-19 vaccines. And the regulators stated that the evidence from more than 13 billion doses of COVID vaccines administered worldwide showed that the vaccines have a very good safety profile in all age groups.
Our Therapeutic Goods Association derives something in the order of 96% of its budget from industry fees. What amount of funding does Pfizer provide to the Therapeutic Goods Association per annum?
Therapeutic Goods Administration, Senator, yes. So it's user fee funded. So there are a couple of different ways in which TGA is funded. There is
the question was the dollar figure, not the rationale.
I don't have that figure.
You don't know that?
If you could take that on notice, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Another recent journal article here in the European Journal of Heart Failure stipulates that the incidence and mechanisms of myocardial injury following COVID mRNA booster vaccination was found to be more common than first thought and warranted further studies. Is Pfizer aware of this? And if so, when is Pfizer going to remove this product from the market?
Senator, I might take this question. I don't have a copy of the research paper that you're referring to. It's not data that we have, so I can't comment on that specifically. What I can do is reiterate that we are aware of these very rare reports of myocarditis. We're aware that the Therapeutic Goods Administration has provided advice to vaccine administrators on how to manage that risk. We're aware that it is all the information that is available is in the approved product label. It is fully transparently disclosed, and that's the decision for individual vaccine providers to make. What I might say is to reiterate what my colleague Dr. Hewitt just said, in that based on the administration of over 13 billion doses of vaccine, regulatory agencies around the world have said that these vaccines remain safe in all age groups, including younger people, including in people who are immunocompromised, including in people who have other medical conditions.
Right, okay. Well, look, I accept that you've been sent here to go the rope-a-dope like Ali Fraser, the Thriller in Manila, so we're not going to get proper answers out of this, but I want you to answer this question. Did at any time your legal compliance teams look to the possibility that the lipid nanoparticle mRNA complexes satisfy the definitions for being properly deemed genetically modified organisms under the Australian legislation? And the question is, did you examine that possibility?
Senator, mRNA technology is not gene therapy. It does not alter human DNA.
So that's not an answer to the question. Was it examined, considered?
Examined or considered, I'm not sure the nature of your question. Can you be more specific?
Well, I can't really be more specific. It was very specific. Did you at any time, did your legal compliance teams look to the possibility or examine the possibility that these vaccinations satisfied the definitions for being properly deemed GMOs under the Australian legislation for the purposes of Australian legislation?
So, again, Senator, Comirnaty is not a genetically modified organism and does not...
So you didn't? Your team did not consider that?
So Pfizer consulted with the Office of Gene Therapy regulator and sought confirmation, in fact, that our vaccine did not fall under the Gene Technology Act 2000.
Has Pfizer notified its underwriters of the potential for future litigation as a result of claims, or will those claims be offset pursuant to an indemnity given to the Australian government?
I can't answer that one, Senator. We'll need to take that on notice.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chair, can I just make a point of order there? I have a document here from Pfizer themselves, and I'm happy to table this, and they actually state that manufacturing gene therapies, and in particular includes transfection, a process that uses HEAK cells. So they themselves admit on their own website that gene technology includes transfection, and transfection is a part of the COVID vaccine process. So can I table this document just to prove that these people are contradicting their own statements?
First, let's pass it up here and we'll have a look at it.
Yep.
Can I just be mindful that the Pfizer hasn't got a copy of this document.
Yeah, I realise that. Yeah, that's
but
what I'm
also, we've only got so much period of time. I would very much encourage, if there's questions, additional questions, which may relate to this matter, that we would send it to Pfizer following this hearing.
Absolutely, Chair. I'm happy to do that. I'd just like to remind the witnesses to please, don't contradict your own website, your own statements.
Yeah, and the committee will circulate and send it over to Pfizer. But we'll now go to another senator. Now to Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming here. A recent peer-reviewed paper in the establishment scientific journal, Vaccine, examined Pfizer's COVID vaccine randomised phase 3 clinical trial data. It used the World Health Organisation's framework made for this purpose, the Brighton Collaboration on Adverse Events of Special Interest. Now, authors of world-leading virologists and pharmacology experts from the UCLA, Stanford University of Baltimore and Queensland's Bonn University, the paper concluded that Pfizer's vaccine was associated with a 36% increase in serious adverse events. The most common were coagulation disorders, including thrombosis, and acute cardiac injury. In every 10,000 people injected, 18 will experience a life-threatening or altering medical complication. Serious adverse events from Pfizer COVID vaccine are 4 times higher than any benefit from the vaccine in reduced hospitalisation. The paper said the product should never have been approved. Would you like to respond to that, please?
Senator, I do not have a copy of your paper. I've not examined it. I cannot comment on it specifically. What I can say is this, that this benefit-risk ratio of vaccination in all age groups, in all populations, continues to be strongly positive, and vaccination continues to be encouraged by health authorities globally, including in Australia. The most common adverse events that are seen are local reactions, a painful arm, a sore, some redness or swelling, some muscle aches and pains, maybe a fever, some fatigue or tiredness. We take all reports of adverse events seriously. We collect that information, we analyse that information, we communicate it to regulatory agencies such as the TGA. They pull that data from the safety data that they receive from other sources, whether that be from healthcare professionals, whether that be from patients directly, whether that be from state departments of health. Their conclusion is very consistent with conclusions of other regulatory agencies around the world, and that is that the benefit-risk ratio for vaccination remains strongly positive in all indications, all age groups for which it has been approved.
Well, I want to know your response with the reported 1,476,227 adverse event reports up to December 2022, including 32,621 deaths.
Senator, I'm not aware of the figures or the document from which you're reading.
Right, in Australia. You don't know, you haven't read up much on all this, have you? You knew you were going to come to this inquiry, yet you haven't done anything whatsoever to respond to our questions. I think it's very poor of you to not be able to answer these questions. You're a scientist, you're from science, Dr. Hewitt, and you're a country doctor, Dr. Thuru. You know, I expected to have more of an answer here because we're going through dire straits. People in Australia have had adverse side effects. You say that injection site is the main cause of adverse side effects. Well, what I'm reading here in your figures and pages of adverse side effects, and you know what most of this comes up with is nervous system disorders. Thousands upon thousands of people, whether it be lethargic, headache, you've got other problems here with them. But another one that really concerns me is about it's to do with reproductive system and breast disorders. Did you state to the TGA the impact that this drug would have on pregnant women?
Senator, it's very, firstly, I reject the premise of your question in terms of those safety findings that you've communicated. It's very important to note that the difference between an adverse event that has been reported and an adverse reaction that has been actually attributed to the product. The TGA carefully analyses all of the reports that it receives and makes a determination as to whether there was a causal link to the therapeutic product or not. This is not something different for vaccines. This happens with all therapeutic products. In terms of your specific question about pregnancy, all of the information that we have has been communicated to the TGA. I would draw your attention. So in the approved product label for the product, it says that there is limited clinical trial data or limited clinical trial evidence in pregnant women, and that it should be the subject of an informed decision between a woman and her physician or vaccine provider. Also, that animal data has not suggested any untoward effects on pregnancy, on fetal development, on childbirth, or on postnatal development. I might add to that expert groups have said this about vaccination in pregnancy. So the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunisation has recommended if you are pregnant, you can get vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine at any stage of pregnancy. They have also said real-world evidence has shown that the Pfizer vaccine is safe if you are pregnant and breastfeeding. If you are pregnant and unvaccinated, you have a higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19. Your baby may also have a higher risk of premature birth. So that is one group of experts. Another group of experts, and probably the most august authority in this area, is the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So this is the peak body of obstetricians, the doctors who have spent their lives training and are specialised in the care of pregnant women. They have said pregnant women in Australia are a priority group for COVID-19 vaccination and should be routinely offered the Pfizer vaccine, Comirnaty or Moderna Spikevax at any stage of pregnancy. They have said there is no evidence of increased risk of miscarriage or teratogenic risk with mRNA or viral vaccines. It is very clear that experts who have spent their lives and are dedicated to examining this data in pregnant women have come to that conclusion. We continue to take all reports of adverse events, whether pregnancy-related or otherwise, very seriously, work with the TGA and other regulators around the world to further characterise the vaccine. But based on the information that is available at the moment, that is the recommendation of expert authorities.
You're still on trial with this drug, aren't you? Because any other drugs that are actually introduced into our society usually goes through 10 years. You actually said that when the pandemic was released, told by the World Health Organization, you said within 6 days you started doing trials into it. You started the vaccination, which you said came out a year later. And it was passed. What trials had you done prior to that? What trials had you performed to ensure the full safety of this drug on the people of the world?
Senator, if I could just, before I hand over to my colleague, Dr. Hewitt, let me just correct the record. I did not say that any vaccination or clinical trial was done within 6 days. I said we signed...
No, I didn't say it wasn't done. You started it. You responded to the World Health Organization 6 days later, and a year later you produced the drug.
Senator, we signed a contract, we signed an agreement with another company, BioNTech, to research the vaccine, and then that proceeded over the year. I might ask my colleague, Dr. Hewitt, to talk about the clinical trial program.
Sure. Dr. Hewitt, just before you start answering, Senator Hanson, there's obviously an opportunity for a follow-up question after this. To Dr. Hewitt.
Sure. So, Senator, I think given the then urgent public health need to responsibly develop a vaccine with a favourable safety profile, we collaborated very closely with independent regulatory and health authorities around the world, and that allowed us to conduct key activities in parallel to allow us to significantly accelerate vaccine development without compromising safety. One of the reasons...
Yep. Go on.
No, Senator, you go.
Right. Last question. You're both Australians. You live here. Were you in the country during COVID-19?
Yes, Senator, I was.
You were. Okay. Dr. Hewitt, sorry if I get through. Dr. Through, you actually made a comment that no one was forced to have the vaccination. Who made the comment? Was it Dr. Through?
Senator, I believe I made that comment.
You made that comment? Right. Mm-hmm. You were in Australia during COVID-19. You must have been fully aware that people, nurses, doctors, people to have their jobs, to keep their jobs, were forced to have the vaccination. Now, do you retract your statement that they were not forced?
Senator, no, I believe firmly that nobody was forced to have a vaccine. Mandates or vaccine requirements are determined by governments and health authorities. I believe everybody was offered an opportunity to get a vaccine or not get a vaccine. I don't believe that anybody was forced to take a vaccine.
A lot of Australians will disagree with you on that one.
Senator Grogan.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that you've been presented with a range of extracts from reports Are you aware of how many academic and situational reports have been published on COVID-19 since the beginning?
Well, I'm not aware. I would imagine it would be a very large number.
I had a quick Google and I got 23,500. Just interesting point. And obviously through that there's quite a lot of different perspectives, which some of which have been fleshed out here. But I understand that one of the great benefits of the mRNA technology is that you can quickly adapt the vaccine to respond to new variants. What other benefits could it present to the vaccine development and medicine development in general?
Thank you, Senator. So you are correct that one of the major benefit is that vaccines can be adapted very quickly, and that is exactly what we're doing to respond to new variants that are emerging. So, for example, with we were very quickly able to produce a BA.4/5 vaccine, which is now currently available and being used in Australia to provide protection against the Omicron variant. But we are also now working on developing a vaccine against the XBB variant. And that has been a request from regulatory agencies around the world for us to focus on that for our next vaccine. We've already commenced research. So processes that normally can take much longer can be now completed within some months, and we can develop a new vaccine within 100 days of identifying the actual strain that we're targeting. So we're aiming to deliver that XBB variant vaccine by October in the United States and at some time after that in Australia. If we move potentially beyond vaccination, mRNA technology holds a tremendous amount of promise in other diseases, non-infectious diseases. So whether we're talking about specific types of cancers or other autoimmune diseases, essentially where there's a protein that's missing or not functioning correctly, and you can use the body's own protein factory to produce the desired protein. So potentially it holds a lot of promise, and Pfizer and many other companies are looking to see how this technology can be leveraged to address the immense unmet medical need in cancer, in autoimmune diseases, and as well as in other infectious diseases at the moment.
Thank you. I do have other questions. I'm going to put most of them on notice because we are tight on time, but I would just like to say, you know, since the workplace mandates have come into force, and obviously we're not looking at very much of that anymore, Pfizer has developed an antiviral, is that correct, to treat COVID infection?
That is correct. So we were proud to develop an effective antiviral agent for people who are most at risk of severe disease. So while vaccination remains the primary first-line defence against severe disease or hospitalisation, for those people who are particularly at risk of a poorer outcome should they contract a COVID infection, and that could be age over 50 or 60 or 70. It could be having chronic health conditions, heart, lung, kidney, liver disease, having diabetes, being in a residential care facility, having a disability or other complex health needs. If those people are treated early with an antiviral agent, such as Paxlovid, which is Pfizer's agent, and it's essentially a take-home pack, a 5-day course of pills, similar to an antibody. It substantially reduces the risk of the disease progressing to severe disease that may require hospitalisation. And the pivotal clinical trial that was submitted to the TGA that led to that authorisation for distribution in Australia demonstrated a 90% reduction in the risk of hospitalisation and death. So that has immense potential to mitigate the burden of disease of COVID-19 that is still ever present in our community.
So for people who are hesitant or anti-vaccine, does it provide sufficient protection for those people?
I said at the start that vaccination remains the primary first line of defence against severe COVID-19 hospitalisation. This is a second line defence or another option for people potentially who weren't able to be vaccinated. And it has demonstrated that it has a substantial effect on improving or mitigating that risk of severe disease and hospitalisation.
Thank you very much. I'll put the rest of my questions on notice.
Senator O'Sullivan.
Thank you. Just a quick one from me. Dr Hewitt, I looked at all the information that was before me, as every other Australian had the opportunity to do, to get vaccinated, and I decided getting vaccinated was the right thing for me, and I was fully vaccinated. But there are many Australians that, in looking at that information that they had, they didn't believe the vaccination was right for them. I'm from Western Australia. In Western Australia, vaccines were mandated essentially across the entire population. I mean, there were a few exceptions, very, very few exceptions. If you wanted to go to work and earn a living and provide for your family, you had to be vaccinated. Now, based on your evidence, I'm staggered that that was the response that you gave earlier to questions in relation to whether or not vaccines, people were forced to have vaccines. If you had to make a choice between paying your mortgage and putting food on the table for your family, it is hardly, you can hardly say that those people were not forced to, because they were making choices, and there were plenty of people that were forced to do it. And there were some in Western Australia, I've had so many that have contacted me that had to go without because they chose not to be vaccinated, because the state government forced them to be vaccinated, frankly. What do you have to say to that?
Senator, mandates or vaccine requirements are determined by governments and health authorities. As a company, we were not involved in the development of any government vaccine mandates.
But they didn't have the same opportunity. I mean, you said that they had the opportunity to be vaccinated. Well, there were people that had the opportunity to not pay their mortgage, and they chose to, not be vaccinated.
Is there a question there, Senator?
Well, do you still stand by your original statement that you made a few minutes ago?
Again, Senator, the mandates or vaccine requirements are determined by governments and health authorities. I don't believe that the mandates actually forced individuals to get vaccinations.
Thanks, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Hewitt and Mr Thakur, for being here. Oh, sorry, Dr Thakur and Dr Hewitt. You have repeatedly refused to provide evidence. You've dodged questions on evidence from Senator Canavan and from Senator Rennick. You have relied instead on appeals to authority and other logical fallacies, including an appeal to authority. So let's talk about one of your experts. The health minister, the former health minister in this country, said, "We are engaged in the world's largest clinical vaccination trial." It's experimental in his view. He was the health minister that introduced these things. Let's go to my first question. What we've seen during the COVID mismanagement and malfeasance was the largest transfer of wealth in our nation's history, from we the people to big pharma via big government that lied repeatedly during the COVID mismanagement. My question is, did you ask the minister to introduce vaccine mandates for employment?
Senator, I reject the premise of your question.
Did you or did you not, did your company ask the minister to introduce vaccine mandates for employment?
Senator, I reject your question and your accusation. We had no involvement.
I made no accusation, Dr Thakur. I asked you a question.
Senator, I was referring to your previous comments as well when you mischaracterised the evidence base for the vaccine. What I can confirm, but we have covered that previously, what I can confirm is that we have not had any discussions. We have not been involved with any governments or any other organisations in relation to vaccine mandates. That is a matter for government. That is a matter for lawmakers. That is not a matter.
Did you ask the Health Department or one of their agencies for vaccine mandates?
Senator, I believe I've clearly communicated our position on that. Pfizer had no involvement has no involvement in the imposition of vaccine mandates.
Did you ask anyone in or near a government or department to ban ivermectin?
Senator, Pfizer has had no involvement in relation to ivermectin.
Does the indemnity you have with the government extend to providing you with indemnity in the situation where an employee is forced by their employer to undergo vaccination and then experiences harm? And if you do have indemnity, I want the proof.
Senator, any indemnity agreements between Pfizer and the Australian government are confidential and we are not able to discuss that in this forum.
Why are they confidential? Because as a taxpayer, I paid for those injections even though I didn't take any. Why are they confidential from taxpayers? 26 million Australians.
Senator,
what are you hiding?
Senator, indemnity agreements between the Australian government and private organisations such as Pfizer are confidential. I'm not at liberty to discuss that.
Why are they confidential? The people who paid for these injections cannot see what they've actually bought. Why are they confidential? Why are you hiding?
Senator, those indemnity agreements, indeed contractual arrangements, as is always the case between the Australian government and external parties, are confidential. And I don't have any information today that might assist the committee in relation to that.
Did or does Pfizer have COVID vaccine mandates for your own employees in Australia?
At the height of the pandemic and consistent with guidance from health authorities, from the New South Wales and Victorian governments, Pfizer did have a colleague vaccination program for its employees.
Do you still have it?
That vaccine, the requirement for colleague vaccination for Pfizer employees is currently present. We introduced a colleague vaccination program in the interest of protecting the health and safety of our colleagues and the communities in which we serve, in which we operate.
We've read that your vaccine mandate was using your own batch of vaccine especially imported for Pfizer, which was not tested by the TGA. Is that correct?
Senator, so Pfizer undertook to import a batch of vaccine specifically for the employee vaccination program, and that was so that no vaccine would be taken from government stocks that was being delivered to clinics as needed.
Thank you. Did you enforce your mandate on your colleagues, your employees? Did you enforce it? Did you sack anyone or refuse to pay anyone who refused to take the injection?
Senator, we aligned with the public health guidance. We permitted accommodations or exemptions for people that had specific medical or religious reasons that they did not or could not be vaccinated. A small number of colleagues departed the company.
Thank you. Does your contract with the government for supply of COVID injections include a clause that negates your indemnity in the event of Pfizer committing a crime such as fraudulent treatment of trial data?
Senator, Pfizer always abides by all of the laws and regulations of the markets in which it operates. It abides by the highest standards for clinical trials and all its operations.
Does your contract with the government for supply of COVID injections include a clause that negates your indemnity in the event of Pfizer committing a crime such as fraudulent treatment of trial data? The question is simple. What is the answer, yes or no?
Senator Roberts, as I had mentioned previously, the contents of Pfizer's contract with the Australian government remains confidential, and I don't have any information that I can provide to the committee in relation to that.
Is it true that Pfizer COVID-19 vaccines were developed initially as countermeasures for the American Department of Defence?
Senator, our sole focus from the start of this pandemic has been to discover, develop and supply a safe and effective vaccine.
I didn't ask you about your focus. I asked you, is it true that Pfizer's COVID-19 injections, vaccines, were developed initially as countermeasures for the American Department of Defence, as experts have told? Is it true?
The vaccine was developed to address the dire global public health emergency that became rapidly apparent in the early part of 2020. That was the only reason for which the Pfizer vaccine was developed. We're very proud of the role that the Pfizer vaccine has demonstrated clearly in protecting the health of hundreds of millions of people around the world and enabling countries, borders and societies...
There you go again, another appeal to authority, another appeal to consensus and appeal to numbers. That's not what I asked. Have you had any association during the development of these vaccines with the Department of Defence?
Just before you answer, sorry, Dr. Thur, just another question, follow-up question after this answer. Yep. Yes, Doctor.
Senator, I have no information on that and I'm happy to take it on notice, but let me confirm again that the sole purpose of developing the vaccine was to protect global public health.
Isn't it true that many standard steps and procedures otherwise required before receiving approval for use were omitted or circumvented entirely to achieve this accelerated time period of development that you talked about, 12 months?
Senator, the evidence that was gathered and presented not just to the Therapeutic Goods Administration, but to regulators worldwide, was thorough and comprehensive, and was assessed by those regulators who made independent decisions on the benefit-risk profile of the vaccine.
I noticed repeatedly that you have transferred the accountability, the responsibility for these injections to the TGA. Repeatedly you've done that. Did Pfizer research the long-term effects and risk profile of its COVID-19 vaccine prior to release? Long-term.
Senator, again, as part of an application to any regulatory authority, the data that we gather and present are used to determine whether or not the regulatory authority feels that the medicinal product may be licensed and supplied to patients.
Again, you failed to answer my question. You're shifting responsibility to the TGA. And I'll be asking the TGA, you might be... Oh, no, we'll let it go.
Yeah. If there's another answer to that, I think it was a question in that, but also if there's further questions, if you give a notice. I know Senator Payman said she'll put her questions on notice in light of the time, and I know there's a quick follow-up question from Senator Angie.
Well, it's just tied to the issue of, and you can take this on notice if you like, and I would remind you that providing correct evidence to the Australian Senate is critical. I want to know whether or not Pfizer had any communications with any government, Australian government department or social media company in relation to the censorship of Australians' social media posts.
Senator, I have no information in relation to your question.
You may not, but I would like you to take that on notice.
We will take it on notice and come back to the committee with any information of relevance that we can provide.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks very much. I'd like to, Dr. Theroux and Dr. Hewitt, thank you for...
He's asked. Sorry, I was saying my message.
Oh, righto.
One more.
If it's a quick follow-up.
Very quickly. I just wanted to ask a quick question about the Doherty modelling, which was crucial in convincing Australian governments to impose mandates in late 2021. In that modelling, they concluded, I'm sure you're familiar with the Doherty modelling, they concluded that, and I'm just bringing up the quote here, that this is a quote from the modelling, high vaccine coverage can reduce transmission and health impacts in urban and remote communities. Was Pfizer consulted by any of the modellers that compiled the Doherty modelling report for the Australian National Cabinet?
Senator, I can't answer that question. I will need to take that on notice.
If you could take that on notice, in particular, if you could take on notice whether you provided any advice to Doherty modellers around the effectiveness of your vaccine in reducing transmission.
Noted.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks very much, and thank you for joining us this evening and having a robust engagement. If you have taken any questions on notice, could you please return the answers to the Secretariat by the 17th of August 2023, and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senators.
And now welcome representatives from Moderna, Australia, via video conference. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
you. I'm Jane Leong, Head of Medical Affairs for Asia Pacific and Latin America. I'm a general practitioner by training.
And I am Rachel Dawson. I'm the Global Medical Affairs Lead for COVID and a pediatrician by training.
And my name is Dr. Chris Clark, and I'm the Director of Scientific Leadership for Moderna in the Asia Pacific region, and I have a PhD in pathology.
Good, thank you very much. I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of any remarks, I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. Moderna values the opportunity to participate in this inquiry and to highlight the critical role that vaccines have played in preventing severe illness and death throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. Since 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic has claimed an estimated 7 million lives worldwide. These deaths are not simply statistics. They represent far-reaching loss and suffering for much-loved parents, grandparents, colleagues, and friends. The impacts of the pandemic, at its outset and still today, continue to have profound and long-term impacts on families, communities, and economies. In fact, this year alone, 4,500 Australians have lost their lives to COVID-19, a staggering figure. However, without the development of vaccinations against COVID-19, the situation could have been significantly worse. Worldwide, it is estimated that over 13 billion COVID vaccine doses have been administered, and over 72% of the world's population have received at least one dose. 1.5 billion of those vaccines have been a Moderna mRNA vaccine. Recent global modelling of the impact of COVID-19 vaccination has shown that, based on officially reported COVID-19 deaths, these vaccines prevented an estimated 20 million deaths from COVID-19 in 185 countries between December 2020 and December 2021. In Australia, over 68 million COVID-19 vaccine doses have been administered since they became available, and over 6 million Moderna Spikevax Original or Spikevax bivalent vaccine have been administered. Moderna is proud of the contribution we have and continue to make towards reducing the toll of COVID-19 on the community. Following the declaration of the COVID-19 as a global pandemic by the World Health Organization in March 2020, developing vaccines was the top priority of governments, medical researchers, and the wider global community, because it was promptly recognized that control of the pandemic would require safe and efficacious vaccines. Moderna was able to leverage its decade of research and investment in the mRNA platform to develop a vaccine that would activate the body's immune response and prevent severe illness and death from the virus. Prior to its approval by regulatory agencies around the world and subsequent delivery to the community, our vaccine underwent rigorous and comprehensive clinical trials to demonstrate that it met internationally agreed benchmarks for safety and efficacy. These trials involved tens of thousands of participants and followed well-established protocols and guidelines to assess the safety, efficacy, and side effects of the vaccine. The data from these trials have been assessed by regulatory agencies around the world, including the US Food and Drug Administration, the European Medicines Agency, and Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration, all of which have authorised the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine for use. Once authorised for use, all vaccines are monitored continuously by the regulatory authority and by the sponsor. Monitoring is conducted to assure that healthcare authorities, providers, and patients have up-to-date information about product safety. Measures such as updates to product labelling are implemented when appropriate and serve to provide accurate information about vaccine safety. This is true for all authorised vaccines. In addition, every single batch of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine that arrives in the country is firstly tested by the TGA for quality to ensure that it meets expected standards before it can be released and delivered to the community.
Dr. Leong, we're quite short on time. If you've got less than 30 seconds, and if there's other words in the statement, then we're happy to take the statement and put it on record.
Happy to conclude. In terms of the bills the committee is inquiring into, as a company that is focused on developing and producing vaccines, Moderna believes the issue of vaccine administration policy is for policymakers. However, we're able to provide senators with information about the development and production of our vaccine, which may be relevant to this inquiry. On issues relating to the development of public health measures during the pandemic, departments of health at the federal and state and territory level are best positioned to address these questions. Moderna thanks the committee for its interest and welcomes the opportunity to highlight the role of vaccines in overcoming this global crisis and creating a safer, healthier world for ourselves and future generations. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thank you. Senator Rennick.
Hi guys, how are you going? My first question is in regards to the weight of the Moderna vaccine. The dose was 100 microns, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. 100 microgram dose.
Can you explain? Yep, thank you. Can you explain why that is almost 3 times bigger than the Pfizer weight of 30 microns? Pfizer used 30 microns and Moderna used 100. Why the difference in weight?
So I can't speak to the dose selected by Pfizer for their vaccine, but I can tell you that we studied a variety of doses in early phase clinical trials, and we selected the optimal dose based on the results of those early studies.
Okay, so if you've got the optimal dose, what's Pfizer got then?
Again, I can't comment on what other companies' products. They obviously have access to information about their products that I don't have.
Okay, so does Moderna use the same mRNA sequence as the Pfizer mRNA sequence? I'm led to believe that Moderna used 2 stop codons and Pfizer used 3 stop codons. Is that correct?
I think the sequence is very similar.
But there were differences, weren't there?
There are differences in the overall vaccine composition.
So tell me this, how is it then you're both coding for the same spike? You're clearly not coding for the same spike protein then, are you? If you're using a different code to what Pfizer is. I mean, there's the alpha variant has a specific genetic sequence. Now, one of you two aren't coding to that sequence, if not both of you.
Again, I can't speak for the Pfizer product, as we are aware that our sequence that we have used corresponds to the spike protein of the ancestral strain of the virus, and I would refer you to Pfizer to ask about the sequence that they've used. Okay.
Does the Moderna mRNA use uridine or methyl pseudouridine?
Methyl pseudouridine.
So that's not mRNA, is it? That's modified RNA.
It's modified RNA, that's correct.
Right, because everyone calls it mRNA, but it's not really, is it? And did you also use
It's a modified mRNA, so it is messenger RNA.
That's right, and Pfizer say that they use that particular nucleotide to increase the expression of the actual vaccine. So
Again,
that would make the vaccine stronger, not weaker than the virus. Is that correct?
I can't comment on Pfizer's product. I would suggest
well, okay, let me put it another way. Why did you use methyl pseudouridine and not the natural substance uridine?
I think this was, there was 10 years that Moderna spent optimising the use of different types of RNAs, and it was found that the methyl pseudouridine had improved properties.
And you can take this on notice. Did you do distribution and degradation studies on that methyl pseudouridine?
Yeah, I'll have to take that one on notice.
Okay, because I know Pfizer didn't do that. One of the side effects of the Moderna vaccine is myocarditis, so I didn't have much luck with Pfizer. Can you explain why the Moderna vaccine causes myocarditis in young people? Do you understand the pathway?
Yeah, what we do know is that myocarditis has been reported in rare circumstances.
I realise that. That's not my question. Do you understand why it causes the injury?
I just wanted to explain that myocarditis is observed after RNA vaccines and non-RNA COVID-19 vaccines, as well as after COVID infection. In fact, it's much more frequent after COVID infection. And that does give some clues towards what the mechanism might be. We have put in place a number of studies to further investigate the cases of myocarditis that occur after vaccination with Spikevax.
So do you think there's a risk that the vaccine could induce a T cell response, a killer T cell response, that attacks healthy cells in the heart?
That is a speculation. I couldn't comment on that.
Well, isn't that the point of the whole vaccine, to induce antibodies and T cells responses?
So indeed, it's been demonstrated that the vaccine does induce a strong neutralising antibody response to the spike protein, and we also see cellular immunity.
So you're saying the Moderna doesn't cause a T cell response because the Pfizer one does?
So just before you answer that, if you wouldn't mind, just Senator Rennick, one more question after this.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Yeah.
So no, I did state that neutralising antibodies and a cellular immune response.
Right, T cell. Okay, so what percentage of profits does Moderna plough back into helping people who are injured by the vaccine?
Thank you. I was going to say we're aware that there is sort of an indemnity for COVID-19 suppliers, but indemnities are policy matter for government to decide. I can't comment.
So Moderna doesn't put any of its profits back into helping the victims of injuries from the Moderna vaccine, is that correct?
So Moderna is a company that's focused on manufacturing vaccines. The matter of indemnity for vaccine suppliers is a matter for government.
So you're not prepared to underwrite the risk of your own vaccine. You're not prepared to actually put money where your mouth is when it comes to the safety of your vaccine. Is that correct?
So just before you answer this question, Senator Rennick, I'll have to go to Senator Antic after this answer is given.
That's just the last question there.
Back to you.
Just yes or no, you're not prepared to underwrite the safety of your own vaccine?
We take safety of our vaccines very seriously. We have a very good pharmacovigilance process in place, in fact, a comprehensive one. However, I would only reiterate that indemnities are a matter for policymakers.
But what about a moral, social conscience of putting some of your profits back into helping victims of the vaccine? Zero? Is it $0?
I might just before you, again, Dr. Leong, just before you answer that, I appreciate.
Well, it's just that she's not answering,
no,
Chair.
I respect you asking the questions. I just want to make sure we can get to Senator Antic and keep to our timetable. But
I'll just take that as a zero. Thank you.
Thanks. Senator Antic.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to, I referred earlier to and tabled a report from a journal, Elsevier, said that wrongly, recent report from the end of last year, which stands for the proposition and found that the rates of serious adverse reactions are occurring at a rate of 1 in 800 people vaccinated. Now, according to your own clinical trial data, do you accept that is the rate? And if not, how does your overall rate of serious adverse events compare with routine traditional vaccine products such as flu vaccines and the like?
So I'm not aware of the report to which you're referring.
This is the report of a prominent medical journal. You're not aware of that?
I'm not aware of that.
Do you think you should be aware of that?
I think if you're able to provide that report, then I could provide.
I mean, this is part of the frustration of this process. Is if you were here, we could provide you with that. But I mean, this has been widely reported. You are a manufacturer of vaccines. I find it difficult to think that you wouldn't be aware of this report.
So one thing I can say is that as a company, we have as part of our pharmacovigilance activities, we do routine screens of the literature to look particularly for publications that include adverse events. We do review those publications and those adverse events, and we do include them into our global pharmacovigilance database. So that manuscript would have been assessed by our pharmacovigilance department, and the information from it would have been taken into account evaluating the benefit-risk profile of our vaccine.
So what is Moderna's overall rate of serious adverse events, and how does that compare with routine vaccinations? Was the question.
I don't have the actual rate of adverse events to hand.
You don't have the rates of adverse events in front of you.
I can refer to the. I'll see if I can refer to the product information. What I can tell you is that the rate of serious adverse events in our very large randomised controlled trials was actually in a similar range to what was observed in the placebo group.
But you can't tell me the rates of serious adverse events. You realise you've come to a Senate hearing today for the purposes of exactly that question, and you can't tell me the rates of serious adverse reactions to your product, which I find extraordinary.
What I can tell you is that on the TGA website, it reports there are 1.2 reports per.
That's the TGA. I'm not asking about the TGA. I'm asking about Moderna. You must have that information. You are a multinational company. You're before a Senate inquiry, and you cannot tell me the rates of serious adverse. I mean, it's quite extraordinary what you're telling me. Nobody can tell me that.
Dr. Clark,
so
I want to cut you off.
I can provide that information on notice. What I can tell you is that we have observed in our clinical trials, we observed no safety concerns. There were no imbalances of serious adverse events of special interests, or deaths between the vaccine group and the placebo group.
Chair, I think we're wasting our time here. Thank you. You can have the call back.
And thank you, Dr. Clark, for taking that on notice as well. Now to Senator Payman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for appearing before us tonight. I'm curious to know, do you have any specific modelling to show how many lives have been saved during the pandemic from vaccination?
Yes, I can respond to that. So the evidence of the benefits of the vaccination demonstrated that after there were 13 billion doses of vaccines that were administered worldwide, of which 1.5 billion were Moderna vaccines, with an estimated 20 million lives saved the first year alone.
Thank you. I've got quite... okay, just in the interest of time, I think I'll put the rest of my questions on notice. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks very much. Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. Upon releasing your vaccine on the public, how long before that did you go into trials?
I can answer that. And your question is how long from the, can you repeat the first part of the question?
How long since the invention of the vaccine did you go through trials before it was actually released on the public?
Yeah, so it was, first of all, over a decade of Moderna research in the mRNA platform. So this allowed the vaccine to be developed within 11 months due to the culmination of the years of research, government agencies and researchers that were coming together to make the vaccines that saved millions of lives during the pandemic.
You're talking about years before, 10 years or 11 years beforehand, of a COVID-19 that was a new virus released on the world. How could you actually do that? And where's your trials on this vaccine, this actual vaccine that you produced as Moderna that was given to the public? How could you possibly have known that 10 years beforehand?
What I actually stated is that there was over a decade of Moderna research into the mRNA platform, the platform that allowed us to develop the COVID-19 vaccine.
What tests were done on people with that specific vaccination before it was released on the public? Regardless of what you started 10 years ago, prior to that, the vaccine that was given to the public, where were your trials conducted and over what period of time?
So the trials were conducted worldwide over the course of the 11 months that I mentioned, with over 30,000 individuals having received the vaccine in that time period.
Usually when you bring in a new vaccine onto the market, here in Australia, it is actually between 7 to 10 years that it must be trialled and tested before it's actually allowed to be given to the public. Why was yours passed in such a short period of time of 11 months to be released on the public?
And that is because of my first comment of the fact that the mRNA platform was studied for over a decade. So this allowed this vaccine to be made within the 11-month time period, and reminding you of the culmination of the years of research, government agencies and researchers who came together to make the vaccines that saved millions of lives.
And there's thousands upon thousands of people, because I've got pages and pages of adverse side effects from people having Moderna from you. And what's very disturbing is people that have reproductive system and breast disorders. What tests were done there?
Dr. Clark?
So we conducted, as Dr. Dawson has said, we conducted very large randomised controlled trials. More than 40,000 people together in the studies, and 25,000 of those people did receive the vaccine during those studies. And we collected all of the adverse events during those studies, and subsequently in post-marketing we've continued to collect through our pharmacovigilance network, and we're aware also that the TGA collects those events as well, and we reconcile them to make sure any of them, none of them are missed. We have a safety signal detection that system that both we and the TGA do this kind of activity. And when we identify safety signals, we do update them into the product information. And at this point in time, we haven't identified any safety signals in regard to what you're asking.
Senator Rennick asked you, was there any compensation paid from Moderna to the people of Australia who have been affected with adverse side effects and also death? What do you say to those people who have had adverse side effects from your Moderna, or those that have actually died?
So indeed, there is a matter of public record that the Australian government provided indemnities to vaccine suppliers.
I'm not asking about what the Australian government did. I'm asking you, what do you personally say to these people in Australia who've had adverse side effects, miscarriages, they've had problems, ongoing health problems, possibly for the rest of their life, that I'm pulled up constantly when I'm out in the public of people telling me about the problems they've had after being forced to have these injections. Now, those people that have lost their loved ones also, of a 21-year-old who died after having a Moderna and a Pfizer vaccination, I will be truthful that she had both of them. So what do you say to those people?
So firstly, in any circumstances of loss or death, we clearly provide convey our condolences to the families. I would only say that indemnities are a matter of policy for the government, and I can't provide further comment on that.
I'll ask you then, there are still people in this country are being forced to have the vaccination in order to have work. There are people who are out of work, won't be employed because they're being forced to have the vaccination. Do you believe in today's day and times, when we're past the pandemic, that people should be forced to have this vaccination?
Moderna is a manufacturer of vaccines, and we're focused on manufacturing vaccines. We do not have a view on decisions taken by public health agencies or governments in relation to vaccine mandates. This is purely a matter for policymakers.
Well, then I'll ask you a question. Do you back your product to the hilt that it should be given to people in order to work? Do you support your product that it will not have any adverse side effects or death on the Australian people?
Our product has been tested extensively and has been reviewed and all the data are reviewed by the Therapeutic Goods Administration. Again, I iterate that we make vaccines, we're focused on making vaccines. We do not have a view on vaccine mandates.
Thank you, Chair.
Just one question.
Senator Roberts, and then I'll come to you.
This one.
Senator Roberts.
Okay. Thank you for appearing today. In Australia, there was a significant rise in excess deaths At April 2023, there was a 27% in excess of the normal level. That's likely 30,000 excess deaths per year, mostly not due to COVID. As the injections increase, the deaths increase. As the injections decrease, the deaths decrease. Can you suggest an explanation?
So I'm not sure where what the data you're referring to is.
Australian Bureau of Statistics.
So I've read the report from the Australian Bureau of Statistics that looks at deaths, excess mortality up to the end of the first quarter of 2023. When I read that report, I noted that in 2020 and 2021, excess mortality was either within the normal range or slightly below. In 2022, we do see that there is an increase, there is excess mortality outside the normal range. But in fact, it does appear to be actually due to the SARS-CoV-2 infections, because the periods in which excess mortality do correlate with spikes in disease activity. And the ABS did do an additional analysis where they subtracted the number of COVID deaths from the total number of deaths. And when they did that, the mortality rate was actually within the expected range. So it suggests very clearly that the excess mortality that we've been observing in 2022 was actually due to the virus.
I noticed that in 2021, after the injections were introduced, there was a spike, growing increasing trend in deaths. But thank you for that question. Thank you.
Thanks.
For that answer.
What point of order there?
Sorry, I'm going to go to Senator Canavan for the question.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Senator Canavan.
Can I ask how many doses of the Moderna vaccine have been delivered in Australia this calendar year?
I would have to take that one on notice.
Okay, and could you take on notice then how many were delivered last year as well, the full calendar year, 2022? And then finally, has Moderna done any studies on the effectiveness of your vaccine in stopping or reducing the transmission of the COVID-19 virus?
Yes, I can respond to that. So as mentioned earlier, COVID-19 vaccines were primarily designed to protect individuals from COVID-19 infection, severe disease, hospitalizations, and deaths, and have actually very effectively done so. However, I can add that the COVE study, which was our large phase 3 study, which was used for licensure of Spikevax early in the pandemic, demonstrated that vaccination with the primary series not only helped to prevent severe infections and mortality, but also prevented milder and even asymptomatic infection. And the importance of that is that prevention of asymptomatic infections can make an important contribution to reducing viral transmission.
When was that study completed?
This was the phase 3 study early on, the very first study that led to the licensure.
Sorry, excuse my ignorance, but what's early on mean? Like late 2020, early 2021?
2020,
late 2020.
2020.
Have you done any further studies with real world data?
So the real world data, which is there's been a systematic review and meta-analysis evaluating the spread of infection to family members, which is called the secondary attack rate by vaccination status. And it was found evidence of reduction in infectiousness from breakthrough cases of fully vaccinated individuals. And actually our studies have investigated viral load and viral shedding in breakthrough cases, and the exploratory analysis suggested that viral load was around 100-fold lower, and the duration of shedding was shorter in vaccinated individuals.
And when was that study completed?
And this was in 2021.
When in 2021?
I would have to get back with you with that answer.
Okay. Are you doing any ongoing investigations on this matter?
Moderna continues to do ongoing investigation on this topic.
On the transmission?
Yes.
Will that be publicly released, or can you provide us the most recent findings that you've got on that? I mean,
Yes.
to me as a layperson, it just doesn't seem to stack up. I mean, we were told by the experts that we reached 70-80% vaccination, it would have a significant impact on the spread, it would stop the spread. Our politicians told us it would stop the spread. Clearly that hasn't happened. So Do you have a simple explanation for why very high rates of vaccination, higher than anyone expected, over 90% in this country, has clearly not stopped the spread of coronavirus?
As a reminder, the goal of vaccination is to prevent severe infection, hospitalizations, and deaths.
It's not my question. I mean, this is a... And sorry, Chair, but the witnesses here today have been extremely underwhelming that they, instead of answering a question, they take it back to a completely irrelevant matter. My question is, how can you explain to the Australian public, some of whom were forced to take this vaccine, that despite the claims in your studies, despite the statements of our political leaders that your vaccine would stop the spread? That's what they said. They said it would stop the spread. It hasn't happened. Why hasn't it happened?
And just as a reminder, the virus has changed over time as well. But again, COVID-19 vaccination programs in general are primarily designed to protect individuals against infection, severe disease, hospitalizations, and deaths.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Good. Thanks, Senator Canavan. If you've taken any questions on notice, could you please return the answers to the Secretariat by the 17th of August 2023? And thank you again for joining us this evening and for the robust conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators. Thank you.
I now welcome representatives of the Therapeutic Goods Administration, with officers appearing both in person and via video conference. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a department of the Commonwealth or a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and should be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. Commonwealth officers appearing today are also reminded of the Senate order specifying the process by which a claim of public immunity should be raised. A copy of the order is available from the Secretariat. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, please, would you state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Chair. So, my name is Professor Anthony Lawler, and I'm the Deputy Secretary, Health Products Regulation Group at the Department of Health and Aged Care, which includes leadership of the Therapeutic Goods Administration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Mr Nick Henderson. I'm the Acting First Assistant Secretary of the Medicines Regulation Division at the TGA.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Dr Andrew Pengelly. I'm one of the Senior Medical Advisors working in the Medicines Regulation Division.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. I'll now go to Senator Roberts.
Thank you. Thank you for appearing today. A recent peer-reviewed paper in the Establishment Scientific Journal Vaccine examined Pfizer's COVID vaccine randomised phase 3 clinical trials data. It used that's Pfizer's own data, own trial. It used the World Health Organization's framework made for this purpose, the Brighton Collaboration on Adverse Events of Special Interest. Authors included virology and pharmacology experts from UCLA, Stanford, University of Baltimore and Queensland's Bond University. The paper concluded that Pfizer's vaccine, its injection, was associated with 36% increase in serious adverse events. The most common were coagulation disorders, including thrombosis and acute cardiac injury. In every 10,000 people injected, 18, that's 2 in 1,000, will experience a life-threatening or altering medical complication. Serious adverse events from Pfizer's COVID vaccine are 4 times higher than any benefit from the vaccine in reduced hospitalisation. The paper said the product should never have been approved. These world-leading virologists spent 18 months reviewing the data, Pfizer's patient-level data, and peer-reviewing their paper. The department reviewed the data in a matter of weeks and made a finding that is the reverse of this paper's findings. Who got it wrong? These world-leading virologists or the advisory panel, the politically compromised advisory panel? Who got it wrong?
Thank you very much for the question, Senator. Can I just clarify that you're talking about the article by Feynman et al. that's published in the Vaccine Journal in December of 2022?
I don't have that with me, but it was.
Okay. So without the article in front of me, I'm going to assume that you're talking about the article by Feynman et al., including Peter Doshi and a number of other journalists. There were findings there that called upon the list that's assembled by the Brighton Collaborative, which includes adverse events of special interest, and you highlighted that there are multiple adverse events there, including serious adverse events to do with clotting disorders. There are also others that are to do with anosmia and chilblain-like effects. There has been a significant discussion around the rigour article in the scientific press. It has been challenged on a number of grounds. One of those is particularly the fact that this is a reanalysis of initial randomised controlled trials some 21 months after the effect, and that's an unusual undertaking in its own respect. One of the challenges about it, of course, is that it's relying on data that was collected at the very start of the pandemic, as opposed to, as has been highlighted at the hearing already, relying on significant real-world evidence that has been assembled since then, including the administration of 12 billion vaccine doses worldwide, and indeed 68 million vaccine doses in Australia up until the 23rd of June this year. The TGA undertakes a number of actions to ensure the safety, efficacy and quality of the medications that are entered onto the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. These include obviously pre-market assessment, and you would be fully aware, I'm sure, Senator, of the provisional approval pathway that was undertaken for these vaccines, but also we undertake significant pharmacovigilance activities in the post-market surveillance. This includes being fully aware of and apprised of literature of varying levels of scientific rigour and incorporating those into our post-market surveillance as we search for signals. But it also includes our significantly well-developed and well-subscribed reporting of adverse event process in Australia. To the 23rd of July 2023, there have been 139,270 adverse event reports for COVID-19 vaccines, which gives us a rate of 2 per 100,000. I think it's important to note that there are a number of features that do hamper our ability to take those numbers as an overall evidence of serious adverse events that are vaccine related. These include such issues as reporting capture. Obviously, it goes down to the inclination of individuals to report those events. I want it to be very clear, Senator, that at the TGA we very much encourage the reporting by consumers or health professionals of adverse events that they believe follow a vaccine, whether there is evidence or not that is actually caused by vaccine.
Talking about the TGA, Professor Skerritt, as I understand it, admitted in answering a question of mine in the last Senate estimate sessions that the TGA did no testing and relied on the FDA. The FDA, in turn, I'm advised, did no testing and relied on Pfizer's trials, the same trials that I just discussed. On what scientific basis did you mandate the untested injections? And Professor Skerritt said they didn't do it because the FDA has $8 billion in budget and annual budget and 15,000 employees. So he relied on the FDA. The FDA relied on Pfizer. So then no one in the TGA, as I understand it, reviewed the patient-level data.
I'll start, Senator, just by saying that I'm not in a position to answer for Professor Skerritt, but there was a question in the middle that I understood to be on what basis did we mandate the vaccinations. Is that correct?
No, I didn't say that.
Sorry, I misheard then. Can I?
I'm sorry if I said that. On what basis did you provisionally approve?
Okay, thank you, and apologies for misunderstanding you, Senator. So, as you'd be aware, the Therapeutic Goods Administration does have the responsibility for assessing and approving medications to go onto the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods on the basis of safety, quality and efficacy. All of the COVID-19 vaccines have been approved via our provisional registration pathway, which enables earlier access to promising new medicines while data on longer-term efficacy and safety are still being gathered. I think it's important to
Sorry, what was that last bit?
While data on longer-term efficacy and safety are still being gathered.
So you provisionally approved them, and now you're collecting the data?
No, it is the role of the TGA to undertake assessment of medication prior to entry on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, and we always have an ongoing role in continuing to collect data, including through our pharmacovigilance activities, which includes maintenance of adverse event reporting and also surveillance for the development of signals both in Australia and elsewhere.
Just on your adverse events reporting, on what basis? Because I've asked 3 times, Professor Skerritt failed to reply the first 2 times. It took me months to get it out of him. What is your process for reviewing the adverse events reports, especially doctors' reports of death? Doctors have reported around about 1,000 deaths, and that's been wiped down to about 14, with no basis, no objective criteria in the assessment process. How can you call that a decent adverse event reporting? Deaths.
So I
Just
think that
wait.
if I understand correctly, there are two questions you're asking there, Senator. One is about the process we undertake for provisional reporting, and the other is the issue that we undertake for adverse event notification and monitoring. Am I correct?
Changing it, that's correct. Changing it from reported deaths to...
Sorry, Senator Roberts, I didn't want to, I know you're doing a follow-up question there, but after the follow-up question, there's one more question.
Okay.
So we undertake, before the provisional approval of vaccines within Australia, we establish the acceptable safety, quality and efficacy of the vaccine based on a comprehensive evaluation of a wide range of information, and that includes leveraging our significant global partnerships with other regulators. It's important to note that we undertake, through a team of clinical and scientific experts at the TGA, a careful review of this data, and we seek advice as well from the Statutory Advisory Committee on Vaccines prior to a senior medical officer making a regulatory decision within the statutes of the Therapeutic Goods Act 1989. The vaccine is only provisionally approved by the TGA if this rigorous process is completed and the benefits of the vaccine are considered to be much greater than any potential risks. Now, on the second question that you asked, Senator, around the I think you were suggesting that there was a wiping or a removal of deaths that have been reported. I think it's important to note, as I was saying previously, that there are a number of reasons why we encourage adverse event reporting, but why the numbers that come through to our database of adverse event notification are not and should not be taken on face value as an indication that there
Excuse me,
Sorry.
doctors are charged with the responsibility of writing out a death certificate and signing it. They know the cause. There were close to 1,000 of them, but they've been wiped by the TGA, and in a review without objective criteria, down to 14. How can you justify that?
Well, I don't think that it's accurate for you to characterise. Well, sorry,
Doctors
I can't
reported deaths.
Appreciate the determination of the cause of death is a coronial activity. I don't know, Dr. Pengilly, if you'd like to reflect on.
Well, I won't reflect on the particular.
So how many of these have gone to the coroner?
So just following this answer, I'll have to go to Senator.
How many have gone to the coroner?
Sorry, Antti, after this.
Sorry, am I answering this?
Yeah, if you could answer that.
So look, I won't answer the question regarding the thousand reports, but I think the issue Professor Lawler is making is that just because you get a report, and obviously if a report is somebody who's died, they have died, what we're actually trying to do is then determine whether that is actually related to the vaccine or to any product. And that is a determination which has to be made by further examination of the circumstances, temporality, whether there were other causes. And that means that a large number of the reports eventually are found not to be associated. And there are a whole range of criteria which you can use for those. I won't go into them, but we can provide more information on.
Could you put it on notice? I want to know the objective criteria you use for changing a doctor's report who knows the patient.
We're not changing a doctor's report.
Doctor reported death and you're not attributed it to a vaccine.
Well, Senator, with respect, we're not saying the patient didn't die.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. You're misleading.
Well, I'm accurately reflecting that we were changing a doctor's report.
We're happy to take that on.
However,
I want the objective criteria by which you change a doctor's reported death due to a vaccine back to not associated with the vaccine.
We're very happy to provide the Senator with information on the process that is followed.
Thank you.
Following the report of a death following vaccination.
Thanks, Professor Lawler. Appreciate that, sir.
Questions on notice through Senate estimates, responses to that question. So we're happy to table those responses as well.
That would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Senator Antti. I'm mindful of the time.
I won't.
And some people have got flights to run to.
Yep, absolutely. Okay.
Not me, others.
Very nice. Of the 6 leading regulators in Australia, Canada, Europe, Japan, the UK and the US, Australia has the highest proportion of budget from industry fees, the TGA does, 96%. And in 2020 to 2021, the TGA approved 9 out of every 10 drug company applications. Does the TGA consider that it is horribly conflicted by virtue of that industry-funded model?
No.
And what percentage of current members of the TGA executive, the Health Products Group, the advisory panel or any of the other advisory bodies under the executive arm of the Therapeutic Goods Association are prior employees of big pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, I don't have an answer to that question, Senator Antic. I'll take that on notice.
Can you take that on notice?
Yep.
And
And,
also,
and of course, we do have, detailed and processes around managing conflicts of interest within the TGA and also our committees. So I'm happy to provide those. As well.
Is it not a problem though that something like $170 million worth of pharmaceutical money comes towards the TGA and it represents 96% of your funding?
So, and thank you for the question, Senator. I would highlight that the proportion of our funding by industry is not 96%. It is somewhat lower than that. And I do also appreciate the comment that a high proportion of those medicines and devices that come to us for review and for authorisation pass. That is, I think, in large part a testament to the fact that as a regulator, we are complying with best practice regulation, which obviously has a significant part of its focus, compliance and enforcement that is undertaken on a risk-based and data-driven basis. But we also significantly invest both time and resources in collaboration and engagement in order to ensure that our engagement with all of our key stakeholders, which includes health professionals, includes the consumers and community, and it includes indeed jurisdictions, and it has to be said those sponsors that are applying to have their products reviewed is undertaken in such a way that the education and the establishment of effective codes of practice means that the quality of applications that are coming to us is very high.
This is ultimately a big cosy club, though, is it not?
No.
It's not?
No, it is not unusual in the regulatory world for the activities of the regulator to be undertaken on a cost recovery basis. And it is undertaken on a cost recovery basis. And I would also indicate that we establish the fees and charges to undertake the work, and we communicate that to industry. And the work that we undertake, all the way from the assessment of applications for authorisation and entry onto the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, all the way through to the inspection that we undertake for manufacturing and product quality, are all undertaken in a way that is absolutely in line with effective codes of practice.
The TGA is not going to bite the hand that feeds it.
I reject, Senator, the statement that we are not undertaking with due diligence and appropriate certitude our responsibilities as a regulator.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Rennick.
Hi guys, can I table some documents just in case?
No.
Is that right?
Yes, yep. Certainly. Go ahead. If you can give it to the Secretary.
Yeah, I'll text the Chair.
Yeah, through the Chair.
Yep.
You get it through the Chair.
Because these guys need those documents. I should know them, but last time I did ask questions, I was told they didn't have the documents, so I just want to make sure they've got the documents. That's okay.
And also, Senator Rennick, I'm mindful of the timing, and,
so
and there's a capacity for questions on notice where it's appropriate. I'll leave that to your very good judgment.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, guys, could I just refer to the Western Australia Vaccine Safety Surveillance Annual Report, page 28.
Sorry, Senator, I will get there.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Thank you.
That's okay. Now, and I'd like to think you're up to speed with this already, but that's why I provided the documents. It says, there's a table there at 8.1, page 28, that the rate of adverse events per 100,000 doses is 264.1 for COVID-19 vaccines versus non-COVID vaccines of 11.1. Now, that's per dose. So that effectively means that the rate of adverse events for the COVID vaccine is 24 times higher than non-COVID vaccines. This is the Western Australian safety data from 2021, and that's per dose. And I note that in order to be up to speed with the COVID vaccine, you needed either 2 or 3 doses. So that's at least 50 to 75 times higher rate of event to be, assuming you need 3 doses a year, than non-COVID vaccines. Given the higher rate of injury, do you think that the COVID vaccine has a much higher risk of adverse event than normal vaccines, based on this real-world data from the Western Australian government?
So thank you very much for that question, Senator. And I would highlight that there are a couple of features that I had intended to explain in my previous answer around adverse event reporting, and I think that they're relevant to this answer. There are issues of causality. Obviously, one is that we do frequently see adverse events after vaccination of any kind, and that does not necessarily mean that there is a causal link. It can be a temporal link. Secondly, I think it's important to note that the adverse events that were reported in the Western Australian Vaccine Safety Surveillance Report, which again, as I mentioned previously, is one of a number of different surveillance mechanisms that we use to identify signals, is that many of them were quite mild and expected.
Okay, so then could I ask you to refer to page 11, the table on page 11, now that you've seen that figure? Go to the bottom set of figures, please. Because I dispute that. Because if you actually look at the figures in 2021 down the bottom right-hand side, you will see that 48% of people who reported an adverse event to the COVID vaccine went to the emergency department and 9% was admitted to hospital. Now that's 57% of people who reported an adverse event actually went to hospital. That's twice as high, if not higher, than in prior years for non-COVID vaccines. So I think it's not fair to say that these are mild events.
No, I appreciate that, and I understand that there has been discussion around the use of the term mild events previously. And I appreciate absolutely the fact that those who have experienced vaccine injury would find that a diminishing term, and it's certainly not in that way intended. What I'm saying is that there are a proportion of injuries that are to be expected following COVID or any other vaccination. The other element
sorry to interrupt you there, but my point is the rate of injury is much higher with the COVID vaccines. That's what these figures prove, because they're real-world figures of, say, a population of 2.5 million people. It's significantly higher.
Yeah, again, appreciate that. I think it's also important to note, and it was noted within the report itself, that those undertaking the survey and the collection of data did not specifically ask patients or participants why they accessed medical care in the days following treatment. I think it's also important to note as well...
can I say that's the fault of the reporting system? I mean, we're rolling out a novel vaccine here, so... that's not my fault. That's their fault.
No, it's absolutely not your fault. I do find it, though, Senator. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I find it challenging to rely on one part of the report as representative of a problem with a vaccine, and then to discharge dismiss another part of the report as a fault of the reporting. And it's one of the many signals that we look at.
Large sample.
It's one of the many signals that we incorporate in terms of our determination. The other thing I would indicate that there is. What we call the Hawthorne effect, which is that there will be a change in the reporting when there is a significant focus on a disease. And I think it's very important to note, and this is in part why we encourage both health professionals and the community to report adverse events, because we want to be picking up those signals. But it actually says on page 28, as you've highlighted, that the surveillance of routine vaccines was a small component of the workload. So,
no, that's right.
So people expect to a certain extent to have vaccine after effects, whether we characterise them as adverse events or injuries. They expect to have vaccine after effects after a routine vaccine.
Thank you.
There is a more prompt pick-up after.
Thank you. So, sorry, I've just got to keep moving on. So I've asked both the two manufacturers tonight, Pfizer and Moderna, can they explain the process by which the vaccine causes myocarditis? I don't want to talk about benefit risks. I want to know why the vaccine causes myocarditis. It damages heart cells. Okay?
Yep.
Can you explain why the vaccine damages heart cells?
So I'd ask Dr. Fingilli to respond.
Thank you. Look, this is an issue of some ongoing discussion in the medical literature, and I think it is fair to say that the absolute definitive mechanism has not been isolated yet. But it's worth pointing out, I'll caveat those comments by saying that obviously myocarditis is generally an autoimmune phenomenon where antibodies are formed against the cells, in this case of the heart, and it occurs after COVID at a higher rate than it does after vaccination, and it occurs in relation to a number of other infections such as Coxsackie viruses. So it's something which is observed whenever there is an immune response. It is therefore likely that it is somewhat related to the immune response, and I guess there is a similarity between the immune response to COVID
That's a fantastic answer. I appreciate that.
Well, perhaps I just...
So given that this wasn't identified for the rollout, and, you know, as you said, it's an ongoing, area of concern and investigation, how can you then rule out, and you've admitted that it's an autoimmune or potentially an autoimmune issue, that other body organs aren't also being damaged by the vaccine, but there's subclinical issues because, they're not, the heart's obviously something that's, has a higher pain threshold or, sends a greater signal, that other issues or side effects from the vaccine, or, when you're saying that, it's not necessarily causal, that the vaccine could be causing other autoimmune issues on other body organs. Is that a potential risk? Do you accept that that's a risk?
Look, Senator, as Professor Lawler has pointed out, the TGA maintains an ongoing surveillance of potential risks and potential adverse events as they're reported to us. It's the fact of the matter is, with all medical products, more information becomes available as they are used.
Look, I accept there's a risk, but my issue is that you've never outlined those risks at the start. There's always the vaccine is safe and effective without any qualification.
Well, I think if you look at the statement regarding provisional registration, it's pretty clear that the basis on which they're approved, but it's also the case that there is a risk benefit, and I realise you've said you don't want to discuss it, but if you're trying to prevent myocarditis, preventing COVID is the best way to do it. And so you do look at the...
given we had 10 million people, I'll dispute that.
You do look at what you're doing in terms of the rate of adverse events, and since it is also an adverse event of COVID infection, the overall benefit, even for that adverse event, is likely to be positive. Now, whether there is some unknown adverse event is purely speculative. It goes to proving a negative, and that's not something we can decide.
Because you're playing with people's lives. You can't say that's speculative. You're risking people's health here.
Yeah.
So it's not. We're not speculating in the casino or
I would say though,
context.
Senator.
Just before you answer. Sorry.
Sorry,
I was trying not to interrupt you as you're asking the question,
Yeah.
but that is the last question, so I'll need to go to Senator Canavan. We are over time.
Thanks,
if you could answer Senator Rennick's comment.
Certainly. So I appreciate, and I think that the speculative comment probably relates more to some of the physiological and virological thoughts around how organs and organ systems are affected. Moving away from the speculative position, as we've mentioned a couple of times, we do undertake significant adverse event notification and monitoring, and in the context of 16 million doses having been developed, the reported rate, and we rely very much on the reported rate of adverse events of myocarditis and pericarditis, have been in the region of 2 or 2 to 3 per 100,000. So we rely on as Dr. Pengilly's highlighted, the growing body of real-world evidence in our ongoing assessment.
It's per 1,000, not 100,000. It's 2 per
100,000
doses.
No, but injuries, the reporting injuries as per your weekly reports, 2 per 1,000.
Yeah. And I'm wanting to make a clear distinction between this specific diagnosis of myocarditis and pericarditis versus adverse events.
And I'm talking about the other 998, because if it can happen to the heart, it can happen to other body organs. That's my point, because you're talking about 200,000, yet your own weekly report talks about 200,000 reported injuries. But thank you. I'll leave that as a comment.
No.
Thank you, Senator Canavan.
Simple question. Did Pfizer, Moderna or even AstraZeneca, did any of those companies share with you or provide you any evidence about the effectiveness of their vaccine in reducing or stopping transmission?
Thank you for the question. Having seen that, I know this has been an issue of some discussion tonight. I think you can look at transmission broadly two ways. You can look at it as the effectiveness of the vaccine in preventing somebody getting COVID, because obviously if you do that, then you prevented transmission to that person. And there are, both in the clinical studies that have been submitted for registration, but also, moreover, in the literature now, an abundance of evidence that vaccination has the ability to prevent people from acquiring infection with COVID, however that is defined, whether you define it with symptomatic infection, serious infection, or just...
Can I just stop you there, given the time? I'm more interested, I think, in the second definition you're going to raise.
Which is
and because the reason, just to bring it back, and I know this committee's been wide-ranging, which is fine, but we are here to discuss a bill about ending vaccine mandates, and it's really that other form of transmission. Can I, being vaccinated, do I stop spreading it? That's what I want to know, because we were often told that we should get the vaccine to protect our grandma, not necessarily ourselves. Sure. And so I'm more interested in getting evidence that by getting the vaccine, I would reduce my propensity to spread it.
Yeah, fair point. I would just say that obviously one way you can prevent spreading it is don't get the disease.
I get it.
So that's the point I'm making. However, and I don't believe it was in the original regulatory dossiers, because I think most companies have said the initial purpose was to prevent disease in individuals. However, there are a number of studies, and we'll be happy to provide these.
Maybe on notice if you
which have
provide
subsequently done those studies. There's studies
about stopping the spread.
Yes, looking at the reduction in the spread by vaccinated people into households, in prison communities, in healthcare facilities. These are secondary transmissions. They're not as frequent because they're harder studies to do, but they certainly have been done.
I'd be interested in them. I mean, I just was wholly unconvinced, especially Pfizer that tonight wouldn't stand behind their own statements as a company. And when you check their official statements, they haven't made any statement basically since mid-2021 about the effectiveness of transmission, yet we still have mandates today. And I suppose just finally, getting back to the bill, does the TGA have a position on whether or not companies should mandate the vaccine?
I'll take this one,
please.
Thank you for the question, Senator. The TGA has a role in approving medications and other products to go onto the role. It is the role of the TAGI and obviously other appropriate bodies to make advice.
Fair enough. I would just note the Secretary of the Department of Health at last Senate estimates did say that he didn't see a justification for mandates continuing, but I recognise the position you're in, Professor. Thank you very much, Chair.
I've just got one brief question because I've not asking anyone any questions, but trying to keep everything on a pathway. What role, if any, has the pharmaceutical companies had in policy formulation by the TGA?
The TGA is a regulator that sets its own regulatory settings. It interacts with industry in that industry sponsors bring medications and other devices to the TGA I should say, for registration on the approval. We have a role, obviously, in terms of, as a contemporary regulator in collaboration and engagement, but it's very clear in that relationship that we undertake the regulatory role.
And that's independent of the pharmaceutical companies. It's decisions made by the TGA.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying to
and
me?
Delegates within the TGA, that's right.
Just want to be very clear for the Hansard. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you've taken any questions on notice, could you please return the answers to the Secretary by the 17th of August 2023. Good, thanks, Ryan. That concludes today's hearing. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Malcolm. That concludes today's hearing. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared and to Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance. The committee has agreed that responses to questions on notice should be provided by Thursday, the 17th of August 2023. The committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Terry.
Good, thank you.